Oh, okay. We are live. Okie doke. So today's topic is gym rats, fat mice, and broken science. Welcome back to Trust Issues, where we pull apart the ideas, institutions, and assumptions that shape what we call science and ask the questions few are willing to ask. Today's episode dives into one of the most important topics in health: why obesity science went off the rails. From the bodybuilder paradox, why some people can eat whatever they want and stay lean, to the infamous fat cute mouse that convinced researchers obesity was caused by overeating. We're unraveling how decades of dogma and flawed interpretation shaped a broken model of metabolism. So I'll be joined by Gary Taubes, who's here, Bob Kaplan, and Dr. Mary Dan Eads. And after that, Mia will be discussing fraud in obesity research, drawing on a study from Eric Polman. So I'm joined by three of the most incredible minds in the space. Gary Taubes is an award-winning investigative science journalist and the author of some of the most influential books on nutrition and metabolic science, including Good Calories, Bad Calories, Why We Get Fat, and you should absolutely subscribe to his Substack, Uncertainty Principles. We will pop that link in the chat. Bob Kaplan is an independent research analyst. You guys need no intro to him. And Dr. Mary Dan Eads is a physician, best-selling author, and pioneer in metabolic medicine. So I don't want to go on for too long with this intro. Let's start with your article, Lessons from the Original Very Fat Mouse, and as Bob wanted to dig into leptin. What led you to write this article on Substack?
Well, Substack, you have to write something regularly. Let's be serious.
Oh, we lost you.
You're I think you're muted. There's a little mute, right? A little mute sign next to his name.
Yeah, he's muted.
You muted yourself, I think. How does he hit the mute button? On the bottom?
Wait, I'm going to try and unmute him. No. We cannot.
You're muted, Gary. Can you hear us?
There.
Now you're not.
Yep. There you are.
Okay, always worth looking like an idiot after you've been honest. Sorry. Can we start again?
Yeah, let's start again. Okay, start it again. Go for it. No,
Thank you. Okay, so why did I write about that? This is my. Okay, so I've been studying nutrition science and obesity for 26 years or so now. One of the arguments that I've been making, along with most notably David Ludwig and my colleague Mark Friedman, is that the obesity research community over the past, basically since World War II, has misunderstood obesity. So this is a kind of profound argument that quacks make, and it's very hard to get anyone to take you seriously, although we have actually made significant progress. The idea is pretty simple. In the US, since World War II, we've assumed that obesity is caused by eating too much, that it's a eating disorder. Even when people try to say that we shouldn't blame people with obesity for their behavior, they end up still blaming obesity on eating more, taking in more calories than they consume, which are still basically, or than they expend. So you still basically have a behavior issue. Either you're eating too much or you're expending too little. Both of those are under conscious control. Because of this thinking, in late 1940s, when the Jackson Laboratories discovered this fattest mouse they've ever seen, they call it the obese mouse. It's just like, looks like a loaf of bread with fur, basically 2 to 3 times as big as a lean mice. They call it the obese mouse. They realize it's a genetic mutation of some kind. They breed this mouse, so you could breed a strain of them. They study them, and then in the 1990s, 1993, 1994, a team of researchers led by this guy Jeffrey Friedman at Rockefeller University report that they've cloned this mouse and that they've identified the gene that's mutated that makes it obese. And this gene makes it eat too much, or actually controls its eating behavior. So when the gene is mutated, the animal eats voraciously and gets fat. This is the basis for all modern thinking on obesity. So if you read a book like, for instance, The Hungry Brain by a fellow named, how do you pronounce his first name, Bob?
Stefan.
Thank you. Stefan
Last
DNA.
name rhymes with DNA.
Yeah, I knew I was going to get it wrong. I always do. Stefan Guillen. If you read The Hungry Brain by Stefan Guillen.
You've muted your.
What? Are we back?
Yeah, we're back.
I have a cord that I plug the mic into the computer, and if you touch the cord, and you notice I talk with my hands when I get excited, if you touch the cord, it somehow disconnects from the mic. I thought I had solved this problem. Anyway, all these books have the modern thinking about obesity and overeating, and is that the genes that influence obesity work in the brain to, in effect, make us eat too much or maybe expend too little, so that people who get fat are ultimately people with this kind of genetic predisposition to being in calorie imbalance. And it's a fundamental misinterpretation of them obese mouse from Jackson Laboratory. So that's what I was writing about. And this is, you had a mouse that gets obese even when you starve it. Okay, so you take a lean mouse and an obese mouse, so they're litter mates. You need both of the leptin genes have to be mutated for this obesity to manifest itself. The leptin gene is a recessive gene, so you need 2 copies of the defective gene in order to manifest the obesity. So you could breed these mice and you could compare one that has 2 copies to one that only has 1 copy, and you allow the lean mouse with only 1 copy to eat as much as it wants, and you have it basically create a system where the mouse can push a lever and get it food, and you can measure how much food it's getting, and you know exactly when it's getting the food. So whenever it gets the food, the obese mouse gets half the food that the lean mouse gets. So you could literally feed this mouse half the food that the lean mouse eats, and it gets obese anyway. So throughout the history of humanity, people with obesity have been saying, it doesn't matter how much I eat, I get fat anyway. This mouse is the exact same case. This mouse will become obese regardless of how much it eats. You can starve it, it's still obese. The idea that diets work by getting animals or people to eat less is meaningless for this mouse, because basically it would die from starvation before it would not have an obese body composition. And so whatever this gene does, it makes the animal obese regardless of how much it eats. It has it might make the animal ultimately hungrier, because as you can see in the photo, the fat mouse is like 2 to 3 times as big as its litter mate. So it's going to be hungrier just because it's bigger and it's growing bigger. But ultimately what this gene has to do is just make this animal accumulate fat, sort of prioritize fat storage. And the problem is, when this guy Jeff Friedman at Rockefeller University cloned the mouse, he didn't know this. He didn't do his homework. He didn't basically study what you would call the phenotype of the mouse. Okay, so the phenotype of this mouse, so you have genotype, which is genetic endowment of the animal or the human, and then you have phenotype, which is how a genes manifest themselves in an environment. And what he thought was this was an animal that the genes make it eat too much, and that's what makes it fat. And he didn't bother to do his homework to learn that people who had studied this animal, including one of his most famous collaborators, Doug Coleman, who shared all these prizes with Friedman for discovering the leptin gene, that Coleman himself in this had reported that these animals get obese even when they're half starved. So it's an example of what happens when a scientist goes into a issue with a preconception. He thinks, well, people get fat because they eat too much. I'm looking for the gene that makes these animals eat too much, and never bothered to do his homework to see, do the animals get fat even when they eat, when they're dieting, in effect, when they're being starved. Like if you were to put these animals in a concentration camp in Germany in the during World War II, they would have remained obese despite people dying of starvation, and I'm sure rats and mice dying of starvation around them. It's just the nature of the animal. And one researcher not doing his homework, discovering something that's considered at the time extremely important, leads to the sort of entire misconception of the science of obesity ever after. And all this guy Friedman had to do, he's a very smart guy, by all accounts, he's a brilliant guy. All he had to do was say to himself, what do we know about this mouse and its obesity, because that's going to tell me how to interpret what I find. And he never bothered to do it. So that's the gist of the article, of what I'm telling. I'm hoping it's such a clear. Why don't you guys just tell me to stop moving my hands when I talk?
I feel like it's so wonderful that you're getting so excited, and this is such a beautiful indication of your excitement that we can't take this away from you.
Okay, well, you should. On my back. Anyway, so that's how it's an interesting problem. The reason I wrote, so why did I write the Substack? I want people to know this story clearly. In an ideal world, I would talk it over with Friedman. I know Friedman, he knows me. He made it very clear to me that there is, how did he put it, quote unquote, there is nothing you can show me or say to me that will make me change what I think, which is pretty much shut off any alternatives. Otherwise, I would have sent him these articles and said, are you sure you interpreted leptin correctly? Because now you have an opportunity to fix the mistake. When I discussed this with Friedman about 4 years ago, he said this was a very interesting observation, that the mouse gets obese even when it's semi-starved, and he hadn't really given it much thought recently. And he implied that he was going to think about it more, but in recent articles reviewing the science, he clearly hasn't. So people, they dig themselves in. They start off with a simple mistake. You don't do your homework. You don't know that the mouse gets fat regardless of how much it eats, just like people with obesity will say, I have two choices. I could either live with my obesity or be hungry for the rest of my life. And even if I'm hungry with the rest of my life, I'm still going to live with some obesity. I might just not be living with quite as much. If you do your homework, you interpret these genes as determining how much fat people and animals store and what they do with what they're fat. It's an entirely different science. And then you end up with even the lay books written about this great discovery of leptin, and the books like Guillenet's book, The Hungry Brain, written about the science of obesity and appetite and hunger. And even things like in recent books, Food Intelligence by Julia Belluz and Kevin Hall, they all have a theory of hunger and obesity. I saw that look, Karen. See, I try to talk about these things like I don't have profound preconceived opinions. It's my life as a poker player. Anyway, so this is what we're dealing with. This is why I wrote the article. And this, I'm hoping that somebody will show it to Friedman that it will piss him off, which it will, because he will see it as ad hominem, which it is. But I would also think that he's a good enough scientist that he would say to himself, this is an interesting point. I should have taken this into account 32 years ago when I cloned this animal and discovered it, and maybe I should do it now because it's never too late to get the story right. What are the odds of him doing that? Wouldn't bet on it.
Gary.
Yes, Bob.
Yes. You've cited several examples of animal models of obesity, similar experiments, right? Like George Wade, I think, like Change Your Paradigm. One of the things that interests me is when you see an experiment like that in an animal model of obesity, it's almost like there should be a checklist so that if somebody does the type of experiment that you see hyperphagia, quote unquote, right? Overeating, whatever the
Right.
gene X, protein Y, or substance Z, that you should do the other experiment. You should pair feed or do something like that. Even if you're not smart enough, maybe it's almost just like a quarterback wristband, a
But
little
it
bit of a
seems
playbook.
it seems like 8th grade science, basically. I don't mean to be derogatory, but you've got a hypothesis that eating too much is the cause of the obesity. So you want to test your hypothesis. This is sort of Popper, Kuhn land. So how do we test that hypothesis? Well, we don't let the animal eat any more than lean animal. We control for eating too much. We control for hyperphagia is the technical term for eating voraciously. We don't let it eat voraciously. We give it exactly how much the lean person's eating or a lean mouse is eating. So we technically can, and that way we're testing our hypothesis. If obesity is caused by eating too much, then these animals will not get fat. If we control how much, if we don't let them eat too much. That's basically what Coleman was doing in the paper he published in 1985 when he semi-starved these mice. He was saying not only, well, at that point, he probably knew that they got obese even when half starved, because as I pointed out in the Substack, this Jean Mayer, who was the world's the most influential nutritionist in the US in the late 1960s and 1970s, he had done a lot of studies on these OB mice. And in his book on obesity and overweight, he actually says these animals get obese even when half starved. I quoted that for decades before I realized that Meyer was actually talking about the OB mouse from which leptin was cloned. So it's just basic scientific. It's like literally 8th grade science. You test your hypothesis by controlling for the factor that you think is causing the effect. If you think your stove, the gas on your stove only ignites when you light a match, you see what happens when you don't light a match. The gas doesn't ignite. That doesn't mean it only ignites when you light a match, but it means that the match seems to be sufficient for igniting. It's basic scientific practice. And what happens in this world, if you don't do it, and I know this because I've discussed this with people like DNA, for instance, if you don't do it, so you don't realize that the mouse gets obese anyway. So now you create a theory about obesity and leptin, and it's a satiety or hunger hormone, and the mutated version, the animal can't control its appetite, so it eats too much. And now you've never done the control. You're not aware that the control was done for you. So now somebody says, look, by the way, the control was done for you. And it turns out that the animal gets obese anyway. So now instead of saying to yourself, oh, geez, I must have screwed up the interpretation of the study, let me rethink entirely, you think, how can I salvage my interpretation? So now you could say, well, the animal doesn't get as obese. So there are multiple mechanisms. There's the one that we established in about hunger and satiety, and then maybe there's another one working with fat storage and fat metabolism, but that's not as important. And the reason we know it's not as important because the animal gets even fatter if you allow it to eat as much as you want. And then you can argue that, and what you end up with is these conversations that go nowhere, where they keep adding what philosophers of science would call epicycles to their explanation to account for the observations you're making, but they never, it's virtually rare to non-existent for a scientist or a journalist who's written about this to say, oh, I get it, we screwed up, and we have to completely rethink our hypothesis, which is what, to me, this mouse does. What I find fascinating is I've been trying to get, journalists, magazine editors to care about this. And they can't do it. If this was a modern story in which the researcher committed fraud, they would put a team of researchers on it. But if you say the mistake was made 30 years ago and is clear as day, and I've done this with a couple of editors, it's like, yeah, it's too confusing. And the other problem is then they have to take my word for it, as opposed to being able to quote, say, fraud investigators or other researchers. So it's an interesting problem when you discover this kind of mistake being made in the history of science, is that you can't really get it rectified. The researchers won't do it because they're too invested in whatever they've been arguing for the 30 years since, and the journalists, for the most part, won't do it because it's not considered news.
How did Coleman, a couple of questions. What did Coleman make of his experiment? How did he interpret it, or what did he speculate? And then I have a second question. Okay. I'll ask you later.
He tried to interpret it as a difference in metabolic efficiency. So the idea is that if the animal can somehow use the food it eats more efficiently, it requires less food to run its body, and then it can be overeating with less food. So his thinking was somehow the OB mouse was so efficient in its use of food that it was still overeating even when it's only eating half the food that its lean littermates were eating and remaining lean. So the obesity, the obese body composition, is now caused by this extreme metabolic efficiency. And this is because Coleman, too, didn't have an alternative paradigm in which to put it. He couldn't just say to himself, as some first principles, right? The animal's accumulating too much fat. It's got an obese body composition even when it's starved. So this gene is doing something to make this animal store fat and not burn it for fuel, what we would call fuel partitioning.
Can you explain that? I was gonna say, can you explain that? And then the other question I have is there a researcher out there that completely disagrees with you? It's all about calories in, calories out, but they could explain back to you the fuel partitioning theory. Maybe not as good as you, but you would say, yes, you steel-manned it, you've got it. That's how it works, or that's what we think. That's how we think it goes.
Yeah. So, what was the first question?
What is
fuel partitioning? So fuel partitioning
theory.
So here's the simplest way to think of this, and we'll give Eric Westman credit for this. So it's not about how much you eat; it's about what your body does with what you eat. So you eat the food. This is the technical term is intermediary metabolism. It's like what happens between the consumption and the excretion. Okay, everything in the middle. What your body does with what you eat, it can use it for energy. It could store it as fat. It could use it to rebuild cells and tissues. It could store it in muscle as protein and muscle. So these are all, it can partition the fuel into all these various different uses. That's all controlled by the most part by the endocrine system, hormones, and the central nervous system. So that's what you do with what the food, and that's, again, technical term, fuel partitioning. So in this hypothesis, it's almost a tautological hypothesis. If you store too much fat, it means your body is prioritizing fat storage over energy use. And that's an endocrine problem. That's primarily a hormonal response to the foods being consumed. And then again, the central nervous system is also involved. One of the fundamental issues we've always had is a lack of curiosity among the people whose hypothesis were challenging. So even at NUSI, the Nutrition Science Initiative, when we were funding research on this, and we were funding people who believed the conventional wisdom, they didn't believe it enough. They didn't find our thinking, they either didn't understand it enough or didn't find it relevant enough or likely enough to be correct that they showed any curiosity about learning it so they could do what you're proposing, which is basically explain it back to us in a way that we would say, yes, you have a good comprehensive agreement, a full agreement. In theory, somebody like DNA should be able to do it because or Kevin Hall probably can do it. Actually, Kevin could probably do it. He would say it's mostly refuted, but there's some questions, and he's going to stay. He said that, I saw this in a podcast he did for his new book, where he's, the guy had interviewed me in the past and was sympathetic to my perspective, and Kevin's view was, essentially what you do is you decide what you think is the most likely hypothesis. And then that's the hypothesis you're going to hang on to until remarkable evidence convinces you it's wrong. And so if you decide that the most likely explanation for obesity is people eat too much, and you're not going to accept a fuel partitioning hypothesis until remarkable evidence convinces you that you have to, then you'll continue to believe. You could still understand the fuel partitioning hypothesis. I mean, if you guys were interviewing Kevin Hall, you would say to him, well, isn't this OB mouse getting obese when half starved remarkable evidence that at least for the OB mouse, this is a fuel partitioning problem, not an eating too much problem? And Kevin may or may not say yes to that. It would be interesting. But for the most part, people just aren't curious. The people who are most ferocious, the academics who are most ferocious in insisting that I'm an idiot on X, tend to be the ones who also take pride in never having read any of my work because it's not worthy of being read because they know that I'm an idiot. Again, sort of circular logic, and it's hard to combat that. The more interesting cases are people like your former boss, Peter Attia, who certainly understands it, but now says publicly that diets work, at least because by creating an energy deficit. So that's a very sort of energy balance. How much you eat is more important than what you eat perspective. And that would also be an interesting conversation, because he certainly understands it. So
that's
it would be
one of the few cases that I think, I don't know, part of it is you have this, whatever, it's like Pennington, or like the aha moment where basically you've been caught with your pants down and you realize I had it wrong. You look at how this fuel partitioning theory works. It's difficult to unsee that, at least for me. So if we're talking about biases, it's very difficult for me to reconcile or envision somebody who started with, say, calories in, calories out, saw this theory, grasped it, essentially embraced it, and then went back. Because a lot of the analogies and metaphors and everything else like that is the German and Austrian researchers saying, like, it's obviously absurd is basically how they end most of their examples, saying, like, this is obviously absurd if we're talking about the fat on the back of her hand or a growing child or any other example of growth. So to me, it actually is pretty remarkable. I don't know what happened. I think you asked me. I don't know how Peter sort of changed his paradigm, changed back, and how, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think yeah, that's a longer conversation. It, amusingly enough or not, I have to reach out to him because the semi-starved obese mouse is sort of an interesting analogy to the doubly exercised, formerly obese longevity influencer. So Peter was a guy who expended twice as much energy as a normal human being while he became what he called not lean Peter. And so I will probably write my next Substack. It was going to be this week, but ultra-processed foods got in the way, and Thanksgiving will get further in the way. But I think I'm going to go from discussing how when you're semi-starving an obese mouse, and it's obese anyway, the concept of an energy deficit has no meaning. So if you were to put this animal on a restrict its eating more, you could not create an energy deficit that would prevent it from being obese, although you could create an energy deficit that would prevent it from being alive. And that Peter, when he was exercising 3 hours a day and swimming from Los Angeles to Catalina and across Hawaiian Islands, was expending twice as much energy as a normal human. So they go from semi-starved to doubly exercised, and yet had accumulated fat anyway, so that he couldn't possibly think that when he fixed his diet, it worked by creating an energy deficit. Even though he might argue that if he was losing fat, he had to be in an energy deficit so that the two are equivalent. It gets very tricky because there's a way that what you're saying is technically correct, even while you're misleading people who might take offense if you're arguing for a non-energy balanced perspective on obesity. I'd be curious. I have to reach out to him and say, I hope you don't mind me discussing this. I consider him a good friend, but he's become too good of an example to sort of pass up. So. Okay, guys.
Wait, I thought Bob was wanting to say something because his mouth is kind of open, and I think
I was thinking of my next question. I was going to ask, like, we don't have to get into the controversy, but Rudy Leibel.
Let's get into the controversy.
So Rudy Leibel has studied leptin as well.
Right.
I'm curious what his interpretation is. I don't know if he gets into energy expenditure or if he's done studies on so-called either post-obese or formerly obese people who lost weight.
I've thought about emailing this to. So Rudy was a investigator on. Rudy Leibel. We got to give context for your audience. Rudy, also a professor at Columbia Presbyterian, one of the leading obesity and diabetes researchers in the world. Did what were considered seminal studies in the 70s and 80s, was involved with Jeff Friedman on the effort to clone the OB mouse, and then was famously cut out of the discovery by Friedman, which is probably why Friedman has never gotten the Nobel Prize, because a journalist named Ellen Shell made all this public in the book she wrote about Friedman's research. And the Nobel Prize committees don't think kindly on people who cut out collaborators to assure themselves a larger piece of the prize. Anyway, Rudy, then I interviewed him for Good Calories, Bad Calories. I thought he was a very intelligent, thoughtful, critical scientist, although I think in retrospect I was a little bit wrong about that. And then we recruited him to be involved in one of these experiments to test the energy balance model, the one that, so he was a collaborator with Kevin Hall and two other laboratories, researchers. So Rudy was one of the people who never expressed any real curiosity about this alternative hypothesis. He had run up against one version of it in the 90s when one of his students had argued that obesity might be a hyperinsulinemia disorder. And he felt that had been refuted and that you didn't really have to think more about it. And when he wrote about it later, he only addressed in the context of this one student's research. I used to say we'd have, when we were running the Nutrition Science Initiative, so Kevin Hall was at National Institutes of Health, and he had issues with traveling. So we had all our meetings in Bethesda, Maryland at a DoubleTree hotel near the NIH to solve Kevin's traveling issues. And at each meeting, we'd meet quarterly, and we would have a dinner the night before the meeting, and we would have alcohol at the dinner, and we would all sit around the table and talk and joke. And I would think that these guys never asked, in my mind, recollection, a single question about why we believed what we believed. So they were sitting with people they thought was intelligent. They certainly thought Peter was intelligent. There's no way to spend time with Peter without being impressed by his intellect. And we would have alcohol. I mean, imagine sitting at a table with people who believe something profoundly different than you do on a subject of great importance to you, having the opportunity to sit next to them at dinner after dinner at dinner and never asking them why they think differently. Never wanting to get into it. I mean, let's say they're all, I don't know, different religion, born again Christians, and you're, I don't know how to pick a religion without seeming like I'm picking on someone, but people you respect, you think they're very intelligent, they're clearly intelligent, and then, I mean, even if you're Democrats and they're Republicans, and you're not going to ask them why. Like, it's not important enough. You're not curious enough, interested enough to say, Jesus, how can you vote for Trump? Or how could you vote for Harris? Do you really think she was the best person to run this country? And you wouldn't discuss it? I mean, there's some things, of course, we don't, just like you're taught, never discuss politics or religion over dinner because people get in arguments, but how could you not be curious? I once got into this discussion with a couple of researchers at Yale who had bought into our thinking on nutrition, and they asked why it was so hard to convince others. And I said it's a sort of a paradigm issue. It's like you're an atheist and somebody's trying to convince you that God exists. You're just not going to pay that much attention. You know you're right. And they said, well, we do actually think God exists. And in fact, and I said, but even if you're reading a book about it, like they read my book, Good Calories, Bad Calories, you're going to be challenging every paragraph. Everything is said, you're going to have a different interpretation until finally, like 20 pages in or 40 pages in, you're going to just say, this guy is an idiot. He just doesn't get it. And you're going to put the book down. And they said, well, there's actually a really good book written by the journalist, explaining why God exists, and you say you're an atheist, and you should read it because we think he'll convince you. And I went like, oh shit, I gotta read this book. They're guilt tripping me into it. And I got the book and I read the whole thing and I disagreed with virtually, I had a different interpretation for different, but I forced myself to finish this book and I came out of it still an atheist or an agnostic. Let's be serious. But it's that kind of issue, you know, but if when confronted with people at a dinner party, wouldn't you want to ask them, what's the single most compelling evidence, you know? What's the second? What do you, when you fall back, what about those people who have, you know, fat deposits on the back of their hand? Why do you think that's meaningful when we think it's just some bizarre nervous system effect that doesn't speak to obesity? Why wouldn't you want to discuss it? And they never did. There's one
that should
time,
be a prerequisite? Like,
well, in
if
retrospect,
it came with
would,
a package that, you know, like if you were to build a scientist or you're a good scientist, bad scientist detector, which I think you are in many ways.
well, so a good scientist
is one of those
is
things that, like, a lack of curiosity, you kind of think this is
fundamentally curiosity is at the heart of it. All you really have to want to know what the truth is, what reality is. What if you're discovering a new fact? It's not just a new fact that's not interesting. I was just reading a book about German chemist, physicist who discovered third law of thermodynamics, Walter Nernst, and he was talking about his history and he wanted to discover a new fact. But you have to be fundamentally curious. It's got to be an important fact and you have to be fundamentally curious and you have to think, did I get it right? And, you know, it's like, it's not just, oh, I discovered something, it's true. I did a 2-week experiment. I found people eat more on ultra-processed foods, therefore ultra-processed foods make people obese by eating more. It's like, did I get this right? Is this clearly the correct interpretation of the data? And there are other ways. How can I test on my hypothesis to make sure I got it right? Because if I got it wrong, discovering it isn't all that thrilling. And on some fundamentally profound level, it's question mark, question mark, question mark. You're curious about what you're doing, why you're doing it, what the correct answer is, how do you know the correct answer, all these things. You've got to be obsessed. I think where we failed is you can't make people curious about something that they're not. Now, in theory, you should be able, I mean, you write a book about it, that should do it. But like I said, it's like trying to get an atheist to be curious about how God manifests himself when you haven't convinced them that there's a God. It just doesn't really work. And for us, it certainly failed. These, like I said, when I confronted Jeff Friedman with the semi-starved obese mouse, he dismissed it like he might have brushed away a mosquito on a hot summer day. It wasn't something he would. Clearly, I'd never got into his mind to say, whoa, how does my theory explain that? And because I didn't know about that when I created my theory, is there a better theory? Is there a theory that explains it better? A fundamental lack of curiosity. I think often scientific discoveries are driven by ego. People who think, I want to be famous. I want to discover a new fact. I want to be famous. I want there to be something out there named after me that will live after I die. And it doesn't, so they're not driven by curiosity so much as by ego and ambition, and they're the ones who are most likely to make mistakes and discover non-existent phenomenon because they're not really profoundly interested in knowing whether they're right. They're more interested in demonstrating that they're as smart and as talented as they think they are.
I mean, I feel like, sorry, this feeds into your bodybuilder bias vibe as well a lot. If we look at all the people promoting that.
Okay, so the bodybuilder story, a lot of my pushback. Oof.
Because I have a bone to pick with this man, and I know that none of you on here will do that, but the way that he shames people online really pisses me off.
I mean, I don't, it's a type of interaction that I prefer to avoid. What pisses me off is just like, put your damn clothes on, dude. I mean, this is like, I have one of my unwritten rules is I will not take anyone seriously who has demonstrated who thinks that showing a
I'll put it back up.
that
Uh-huh.
is meaningful, unless there's a before picture. If there's a before picture, you could be making a point that I went from A to B, but if their point is, look how cut I am, dude, or look how many pull-ups I could do, or I mean, again, I hate to say this because every time I go online, Sean Baker, I see some video of Sean Baker doing some insanely remarkable feat of physical prowess at 60 years old, and I get the point. But I don't know if he wouldn't be able to do that on a different diet. Although the point is he can do it on his diet. It's funny, I was talking to Carlos Montero, as I pointed out before the podcast, and Carlos said, I was bringing up with the UPFs the problem of orange juice, like fresh squeezed orange juice is not an ultra processed food, but does that mean it's good for you? And he said, well, you can make the same argument for steak. That's another food we know is bad for you. And
He said that?
And I'm afraid I'm going to have.
He's Argentinian, and he said that.
He's Brazilian. So if he was Argentinian, he might feel differently. It's bad for the anyway. I'm
Brazilians.
Well, it's interesting that I remember from whether it's In Defense of Food or Food Rules, that little pamphlet, and has like 64 rules by Michael Pollan. So he's famous for, was it eat food, not too much, mostly plants.
Mostly plants.
And his two facts, what are his two facts? That if you adopt a Western diet, you effectively get fat, sick, and diabetic. You go off the Western diet, things get better. His second fact was that humans are adapted to eat a range of foods. And he cites like the Inuit, the Australian Aborigines, and then some other cultures that eat high carbohydrate diets. And then he goes on to say mostly plants, and to avoid, but I guess it's just whatever the paradigm is, because it's energy dense, I think is what he said in his, and I don't know what that has to do with the processing of the foods, because it's already energy dense, I guess, before.
It is, yeah. Anyway, I getting back to Sean, I am tempted to send a few Sean Baker videos to Carlos and say, I think Sean is basically our age. I think Carlos and I are all, I mean, he's a decade younger, but for all intents and purposes, we fall into the same age category in the Concept 2 online rankings, where I have to go on and see that Sean is inevitably number one, and I'm number 473 out of 520. Anyway, I got distracted. So the bodybuilder thing. Yeah, Lane Norton, what is it? Lane Norton, PhD, is how I suspect I should.
So
we talked about the feedback you get from X. So I get pushback from
let's do it again.
A few academics who haven't gotten bored of it, who insist that I'm just wrong because, of course, it's all about thermodynamics. And then I get pushback from people like Lane Norton, the bodybuilding community. And so I can't read what this. Lane says that basically, if I think that carbohydrates make people fat, which I do, how do I explain people like him who eats a lot of carbs and voila? Okay, kill the picture.
Okay, I want to say that this is a massive issue in the fitness community that we're in, and that's really why I want to raise this.
And it is. It's. I mean, it's weird because I can't. We're all kids, we know inherently that some of us are thin and some of us are chunky. And some of us are very energetic and some of us are not. It's like you have a friend who's 5 minutes away from being put on an ADHD drug because they won't stop moving, and you have another friend who's sitting in the corner. And you don't think of the fact that like all that motion makes this kid thin and that kid's fat because they eat too much, no matter how hungry they might be. It's just like people are built differently. Okay, it's sort of an inherent thought. Some of our friends are heavy, some of our friends are thin. I'm thin or I'm not. It's like just how children think about other children, and then somehow they become adults. And you start thinking, well, I'm thin and I bodybuild and I eat a lot of carbohydrates. Therefore, if anybody eats a lot of carbohydrates, they will be thin too, or at least they will be if they spend 3 hours in the gym the way I do, flexing in front of the mirror. As you can see, I've had a bias against bodybuilders for a long time. Even
I don't think we
Well,
should lump bodybuilders, okay? Because there are some really great ones, but there
Now,
are.
I'm sure there are, but the flexing in front of the mirror thing was just always hard to take seriously. Okay, you're in the gym, you're working out because you're playing some sport, and they're flexing in front of the mirror to see if their third deltoid is sufficiently developed that they can, or do they have to work on that one pull down thing again. Always had issues with it. I mean, it doesn't mean I'm not biased, and I don't, I actually, my brief stint in Hollywood, when I was trying to write screenplays, I wrote a script under a pseudonym, and it was called Invasion of the Body Builders. And the concept was a group of bodybuilders in Venice Beach get a bad batch of steroids and start inflating out of control. And in order to get enough protein for their ever-expanding muscles, they had to eat live human flesh. So it's a zombie movie with bodybuilders, and the pseudonym was Tommy Mann.
Okay,
Thomas Mann. Bob, are you?
No, Thomas Mann.
Thomas Mann. Death in Venice.
Thomas Mann.
Okay, that's to show how effete I was back then. Unfortunately, this script never went anywhere.
Oh.
Although the producer is still around, it's been rewritten about 7 or 8 times. It's now a serious horror movie. The comic elements are gone, and I don't have great hopes for it. And I hope if it ever gets made, I don't see a penny in royalties. They can take all the credit, but it has gone through multiple iterations.
I'm impressed.
And I worked out when I lived in Venice, which I did. I worked out at Gold's, the famous Gold's gym, and so there was a lot of flexing in front of mirrors that I was exposed to.
And steroids, it sounds like, as well.
Yeah. Anyway, the point is with these people, it's just complete. They can eat. The idea that some people can tolerate the carbs in their diet and some people can't seems to be a concept that requires curiosity to think about. And they're not curious. So they know they're telling people to eat carbs. They have various macronutrient profiles. They want to, the ways to get cut before shows, all those various ways of thinking that are all based on people who put on muscle relatively easily, even though they understand that you could put on muscle more easily with the help of steroid hormones. Or growth hormone or testosterone. So they know that hormones play a large role in that kind of body composition. But unfortunately, insulin can also be useful to bodybuilders because they partition the fuel they eat differently. So you get people like Lane, who our buddy Peter Attia thanks Lane for his nutrition counseling, is one of the people who read his nutrition chapters in his book. Who else? The Biggest Loser woman.
Oh, God, Jillian Michaels?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she was crediting Lane recently. Huberman credits Lane for clarifying the issue of this being a caloric energy balance problem, obesity, not a carbohydrate, insulin, or endocrine problems. So, which is again an example of how when people tell you what you want to know, what makes life easy for you, you have a tendency to believe them and not think very critically about it. I was surprised because I actually went back to look at, I wasn't going to do this before. In the past, if I had checked Lane's references, I would have had to actually pay for his book, which I wasn't going to do. He charges like $50 for his weight loss Bible. I forget what it's called. But nowadays, thanks to various archives, you can get all these books for free. You feel a little bit guilty, but if I ever see Lane in person, I'll pay him the royalties that I owe him. And now I could actually, I could see his references for how he knows for sure that this is an energy balance problem and not a fuel partitioning problem. And it turned out that the references he used, 2 of them were ambiguous and 2 of them were actually miscited because they made the opposite point from what he said they did. So, but again, these people, you get to a certain level, you're taken seriously. Most people don't go back and look at references. They don't see that as part of the game, and they don't see it as part of the game because they're not fundamentally curious about whether and which side is right.
I mean, it's sad. I had a conversation with Dr. Tro last night, and I kind of brought up this issue because I think they've had some debates. And he mentioned that Lane's never published any research in this space at all. He's done some stuff with Don Lemon on protein, but nothing with regards to calories in, calories out that he promotes so heavily. I think my biggest gripe with somebody like him and some of the other like bro physicians out there is that they're just nasty. They're mean, they're nasty. They use personal attacks on people's appearance in order to support what they're putting forward. And I find it absolutely disgusting.
And again, I kind of agree with you. The idea is, look how fit I am. Clearly, I know. And the problem is, with the bodybuilding world, the physical trainer world in general, it's like it attracts people who are very fit, who are naturally fit. I mean, they worked out their whole lives, so they're fitter. So if you're struggling with your weight, I mean, unless you're one of these people who were obese and managed to lose weight and become very fit merely by exercising rigorously, if those people exist, they'd have to prove it to me. But for the most part, you get very lean, fit people who think, and this is just a natural way to think. It's I'm lean and fit, and I eat in moderation. Therefore, if everyone ate in moderation, they would be lean and fit too.
Yeah.
That's what they say. Whereas our side tends to be full of people who actually either struggled with our weights ourselves and or treat patients who struggle with their weight. So our experience, what we see is very different. What we see are people who were overweight, obese, diabetic, and changed the way they eat to become healthy. And these are people usually who tried everything, like I did, and most of us did. And then you get to something that works, and you tend to stop there. I mean, maybe there's some people go, okay, that worked. Let me see if this works better. But for the most part, if you solve your problem, you stop on that problem. So you've got these people who are sort of naturally lean, who know what the truth is, who, like the epidemiologists, Carlos Montero, who I was interviewing, who I thought was a wonderful, smart, intelligent man, but he's a global public health researcher who's not thinking about what does it take to make a patient with obesity lean. He's thinking about what does it take to stop a population from becoming lean. I used to do this with Rudy Leibel. I did it with Rudy once. He's the only person I ever did it. It's like, if you think that people get obese by eating too much, what about that person? Did they eat too much? Like, let's just sit out in public and watch people go by who struggle with weight, who might be 50 or 100 or 200 pounds overweight, and you tell me which ones you think are gluttons. and which ones you think might have some genetic metabolic fuel partitioning problem, where the storage of excess fat is beyond their control. When I tried to do this once in Houston with Rudy Leibel, I failed. I could not get him to think in terms of that individual. You are implying that that individual refuses to eat 50 calories less a day, which is what it would take by your thinking to make them not obese. And I just couldn't get him to think about it like that.
Wow. I would love
Needs to go.
Sorry.
I was just going to say he needs to go spend some time in a clinic seeing actual people, because after decades of doing that, I can tell you, one size doesn't fit all, for sure. And a bodybuilder is a different animal completely. An elite athlete is a different animal from the metabolically ill, overweight persons of all ages anymore. It used to be adults; it's now kids too. And they don't respond in the same way. And I can't imagine, in all the years that I've treated patients, anybody that could have eaten 400 grams of carbohydrate a day and not have just blown up like a balloon. All of our patients, if they overate a little bit, they gain 3 pounds of water weight. So,
and the funny thing is, like, Rudy is he's a clinician. He treats patients, but and if you never try a ketogenic diet, you never get to find out that it might actually do something that other diets do not do. So that's, I always live by this Richard Kahneman concept, lyceati. What you see is all there is. So Kahneman, a famous cognitive psychologist, Nobel laureate, and what you see is all there is, was this concept to describe sort of how the world works. So what Rudy sees is patients with diabetes who never get better. What you saw in your clinic, Mary Dan, is patients with obesity and diabetes who did get better. Okay, but he never tried what you tried. So what you're seeing is very different things. He's right based on what he was seeing. I mean, his patients got better with drug therapy. And he never thought, and then he had created a way to think about the problem that allowed him to not worry about people who could get better on diet. Let me point out one thing, by the way, just because this is all very ad hominem, right? We're talking about Lane being a over-muscled idiot, and Jeff Friedman not doing his homework, and
Peter just being such a disappointment.
Peter being a disappointment, and Rudy. I did, as Bob knows, I have been working on a book on the history of obesity science. I spent a lot of time, much time, up in my office reading like pre-World War II German science articles that have been translated by AI into English, so I can read them. What I find fascinating by science back then, so this is before you had 30, 20, 10, 20, 30 names, authors on every paper. So when they would discuss the conflicts in the science, they would just say the person's name. Rubner says this, but I don't believe that he used the right analysis, but Schwitz says did this study and found this, and Graf found that, and it was acknowledging that science is done by people, not by anonymous collaborations of dispassionate intellects.
Which would be amazing.
Well, we're getting there with AI, but I'm sure AI will have personality.
I think AI is biased already, if we really look at it.
Oh yeah, I'm sure it is, but that's a longer conversation. Anyway, so this is it. It's sort of on some level. Like I was trying to decide how much trouble can I go after Jeff Friedman? Can I say this man didn't do his homework? And Friedman makes it easy because, again, he famously, went out of his way to cut out people from the discovery so that they wouldn't get credit, so he would get more of it. not just Rudy Leibel, but a graduate student who described in this book, he said it was like he had written 11 of 12 chapters of a book, and then he was not allowed to work on the 12th chapter, and his name wasn't on the cover. Jeff Friedman makes it particularly easy to do this, but I do think that this work is done by humans who interpret it. And if we talk about that, so people always go after me because I'm the sole author of my books. And they have every right to just say Taubes says this, Taubes says that. But I think science benefits from that too. And that way, if you make a mistake and somebody is pointing out the mistake you've made, it's not just some, buried in the references, reference 32, your name at the end of 17 others, but it's your name made this mistake. It requires knowing who did the primary work, but it's always, the lab chief ultimately gets credit one way or responsibility. But I do think science benefits. It's one of the ways these discussions have changed since World War II, where the scientists themselves have been left out of the discussion in place of only the papers, as though they were written by something other than scientists.
Whose dog's that?
That was my dog.
Oh,
Well, actually, it was Sloane's dog.
You have a dog?
And a cat.
Wait,
Yes.
I know. I remember the fat cat. What was his name again?
Chumley, Chumley. Yeah, no, she passed. Chumley passed away.
I'm sorry, because she was so obese and she used to steal all the neighbors' cat food.
No, we kept her very much under control, how much she ate. She was obese anyway. She was very much like the Obie mouse, but she was not as obese because she ate nothing but salmon, pure salmon,
Oh my God.
very expensive.
Kevin Hall's study as well with the salmon?
We probably could have done, if I fed her ultra processed food, cat food, she blew up like a balloon. She also drank a lot more, which is
Poor little
the
diabetic.
water weight thing. Anyway, I was convinced this cat was going to live to be 30, and we would prove that, raising a animal, anyway, died at 14.
Oh, I'm
Pure
sorry.
salmon did not, if it extended its life, no way to tell. So,
I mean, I would love to touch on the topic of ultra-processed food and how much we hate this term. Well, I mean, I shouldn't say we because I can't speak for you guys, but I was recently at a conference in London and one of the speakers stood up and they were like, David Ledvig needs us to identify the top 3 ultra-processed foods that are addictive. And I thought this was the most stupid question I'd heard in my entire life. But that's just me. So I would love to hear what you guys think. Don't go.
I don't think anybody's come up with a reasonable definition of what ultra processed foods are exactly.
Well,
I mean, everybody, I guess, has their idea of it.
What's curious, curious or confusing is it Montero that he came up, or his group in Brazil came up with the NOVA classification.
Scores, yeah.
And when I see that classification, usually in parenthetically, not an acronym. Something it's in all caps, and like so what is it? But one
so
of
this
the
is
things,
your issue.
one of my things is I've got a lot of hang-ups, of course, but part of it is like, how are you defining this? It really is like, it's a very new term. You're kind of turning it upside down, right? You look at ingredients of Hostess donuts, and it's like flour, sugar, and soybean oil. Those aren't the problem. Those are foods. The problem is contains 2% or less of fill in the blank, sodium, phosphate, fill in the blank. Those are the things that we should care about. But to my bias, my latest bias, everyone, ROS, reactive oxygen species, I'm looking at linoleic acid. So of course, like I go to the NOVA classification and I think, I've seen how canola oil, rapeseed oil, canola oil, how it's made.
Mm-hmm.
That to me sounds like it's right in the wheelhouse for an ultra processed food. You can watch on like How It's Made, History Channel, and it's like a modern marvel of how you can extract you can wring out some corn oil from a cob of corn. And I think in their definition, they say it's commonly used in the kitchen. And then I just think, is the horse already out of the barn? That means, so sugar's used in the kitchen, it's not an ultra processed food. If foods that are sort of novel, you had a chapter, I think it was, and Why We Get Fat, right? Where there's like plant meat or plants. And you talked about this sort of from a historical or evolutionary perspective, that a lot of these are novel foods and the way that they're processed. But I guess if you're curious, you would, this is probably helpful, but it really kind of goes around in a circle, I think, with the definitions.
For sure.
Yeah, it's talking to Carlos about it. And the way he thinks about it is these are dietary patterns. So the dietary pattern that associates with obesity and diabetes is a dietary pattern rife with these industrial food products. For he'd probably perfectly accept food-like substances as terminology for Nova-4, for ultra-processed foods. And the other foods, so if you tend to eat the three other, less processed groups, then you will tend to be not obese and not diabetic. And if your diet is dominated by ultra-processed foods, you will be. And so to him, this is association that is probably causal, and it helps you sort of define this, and it helps you go after the purveyors of ultra-processed food, these transnational corporations that are responsible for spreading these all around the world. And they would say this is another way to define the problem with foods on top of this sort of nutrient-centric perspective that we grew up with: fats, carbs, sugars, oils. That doesn't help you explain the obesity epidemic, but the UPF thing does. I personally think it creates more problems than it solves.
Oh, yeah.
That it's a sort of fancy way, not just food-like substances, but junk foods. We all know what junk foods are. So if you're just giving dietary advice and the advice is don't eat junk foods, and if you don't know what junk foods are, I don't think we're going to reach you anyway. Like, you really think that when you're sitting there eating, not just drinking your Coca-Cola, but eating your Lay's potato chips or even your baked Lay's low salt potato chips, and I used to eat in the 70s, 90s. Remember the baked?
Yeah, they're low fat.
Low fat. And it's quite possible that we're different. But it's a way to categorize and classify junk food that you can then go after the purveyors, the marketers, the advertisers, and everybody to try and rein in this tide of junk food or food-like substances that have washed over the world, that everyone's thinks that they're more convenient, they have shelf life, they're easier, they're cheaper. And ultimately, Michael, a lot of it is just Pollan's thinking, or aligned with Pollan's thinking. We have to cook for ourselves. We have to make real food. We should buy from the external aisles of the supermarket, everything on the inside. Stuff we've been hearing for 50 years. It's kind of a repackaging of it with a very specific terminology. And then the experimental evidence in support are studies like Kevin Hall's study that, I would argue is worthless, and Ludwig and Walter Willett and others have argued publicly and are worthless. And again, this is a difference in science. So in an ideal world, Kevin Hall would think, whoa, they make some really good points. Let me redo this study and take all their points into account and see if we can do a better study. And the problem is Kevin has to get, assuming he still worked at NIH, which he doesn't, he then has to get funding to do the study. And he's pretty confident that even if he does it, the David Ludwigs of the world are going to criticize the next version, unless it agrees with what Ludwig found, believes. So it's sort of, you have this completely dysfunctional science that's now embraced a terminology that I think is kind of meaningless, and like I said, is likely to do little to nothing, but at least the nutrition community can feel like they're doing something. They've made an advance. They've identified ultra-processed foods. Recently, the series in The Lancet, in which they started with an introduction, included a one-page profile of Carlos Monteiro, where it referred to him as one of the great names of nutrition, like he should go down in history. Like, I want to name Ansel Keys. Give me another great name in nutrition. The
John
guy
Mayer.
No, let's skip my year too.
Louis Newberg.
Liebig, Rubner, the vitamin people.
Von Bergman. Oh, the vitamin people.
Who did this? The not beriberi. What's the other vitamin B deficiency disease?
Pellagra.
The famous Pellagra studies, and and I again, very thoughtful, very smart, caring man, but it's a multisyllabic terminology for junk food or food-like substances, and I don't see how you stop people from eating those.
I agree. I'm worried about this whole focus on food dyes, where we're like, okay, well, removing the food dyes, essentially, then you start thinking that it makes this junk food safe or better to eat, which is not the case, because we're not looking at food dyes and studies and their effect on health, right? But we are looking at sugar.
Well, that's the argument I made with Carlos, and I wish I could tell you how he responded. Fruit Loops came up. Like, a Fruit Loop minus the food dye is still Fruit Loop. Yeah. His argument is, if you don't use all these, it's interesting, if you don't use all these emulsifiers and food dyes, basically you can't. So all these industrialized products are used to basically make real foods, which are up to NOVA category 3. So NOVA 1 is unprocessed foods and minimally processed, and NOVA 2 are ingredients like salt, fat, sugar that you'll find in the kitchen and that are used by people to make meals. And then group 3 is processed food. So, food products made by adding sugar and or fat or salt to create simple products from group 1. And then group 4 is everything that's done with that to make it so that it's now harmful. And if you don't have all these emulsifiers and food dyes and additives, etc., you can't make those foods palatable. It's not that they won't be hyper palatable. You can't make them edible. Right. You can't put as much sugar. Yeah. It's sort of, so now that'll solve the problem. The ultra processed foods will become inedible and expensive, and people will stop eating them.
They can't make them shelf stable without all that stuff. You can't put. Yeah. That's why stay out of the middle of the store. You can't put crap on store shelves and ship it across country and leave it there forever and a day without putting all that bad crap in it. That's what allows it to allows the whole business model to work.
Yeah. So it's sort of. That's an interesting way to think about it. If we just. This idea that these foods are hyper palatable. I have issues with that too, but if they literally can't be palatable, or if your cornflakes were to rot in the refrigerator in the shelf as quickly as your Brussels sprouts do in the, that would be a problem. In their ideal world, everybody eats stone-cut oatmeal for breakfast, and I did not ask what we should put on it.
Now you're getting into group 2.
It's group 2.
Now you're getting into group 2. Slippery slope.
I actually did this.
I cook a steak on my grill and I don't do anything to it. Is that a group 1? or the fact that I cooked it, am I now
Wait, pasta
No
and
problem.
rice are
Group
group
two-
one?
Group
just a
2 is
steak on the grill,
okay.
ribeye on the grill? I don't think I've ever not salted a steak, but let's say I do that. I just cook a ribeye
Right.
on the grill and I eat it. Is that a group
Yeah.
1? And is that
Oh,
better
but
than
he's
group 2?
not saying that group 3 is
Stay out of
worse
4?
than group 1. That's another way to think about it, though, which is, in our world, it's interesting. It's a messy sub. I think it's indicative of how little progress these people have made,
Yeah.
but they don't.
But now everyone's arguing between
They're
themselves.
the ones.
Well, because they haven't studied the history. They don't know. This is
Well,
brand
that's
new.
part of it. I asked Carlos if he had read The Case Against Sugar, because one of the obvious arguments is how much of the problem with UPFs is the sugar content. And in fact, it's interesting, in this paper they have in the Lancet, they show UPF consumption going up over time in various different socioeconomic countries. So low-income countries, middle-income countries, high-income countries, and which products are going up. And in the very low-income countries, the entire increase, all the ultra-processed foods are sugary beverages.
Mhm.
And by the time you get to the highest, if you're looking for this in the paper, Karen, I think it's figure 2. And then you get to the highest country, and it's 60% of the ultra processed foods are sweetened beverages, which could be artificially sweetened, or sugary snacks. So the question is, if you were to just get rid of the sugar, how much of the problem would that solve? But the way Carlos thinks about it is, if you just get rid of the ultra-processed foods, you're going to get rid of all that sugar. So,
And a lot of other bad stuff.
So it's an interesting lesson, because I was going to write, I'm going to write this for the Atlantic. Let's hope they publish it. The editor said, you're going to be critical. So the top editor is probably going to want comments from people. So I was just going to write an opinion piece, which doesn't require doing interviews. I know what my opinion is, but they said they're probably going to want, because it's going to be critical, they're going to want comments, responses from the sources. So I reached out to Carlos Montero and this guy, Barry Popkin, who was the primary author on the second of these Lancet series. And I know Barry from way back. And I interviewed them both. And because I interviewed them, it's much harder to be critical, and certainly to be cutting when you've had personal interactions with the people whom you are going after, who's thinking you are. So one way or the other, the piece will be, I guess you could say, more balanced.
What?
Because I've interviewed. Well, my thinking is, right, I know both sides very well, but I can make fun of them, but I don't want Carlos or Barry to think, oh, well, Taubes is, look at, I spent this time talking to him, I gave him my time, we had a very nice conversation, and he does this to me.
Wait, how can you be worried about his feelings when you should be worried about the truth?
Well, ideally, what I will write will be truth.
Yeah.
Ideally, but what I will do, because I've interviewed them, is give more credence or more space to their perspective and what they think is truth.
Okay.
Ideally, without compromising the space and strength of the argument that I make about what I think is important. But it is an interesting issue. I like that he's clearly a thoughtful, intelligent, interesting guy. I just happen to think he's wrong.
Yeah.
In
Popkin,
theory,
or
were I to ever
both?
have a meal with Lane Norton, he would be less willing to show me his body.
Well, he's also not going to share the bread basket with you.
The what?
He's not going to share the bread basket with you either.
Yeah, that's true too.
400 grams of calories. But okay, sorry. If you had to meet with Lane Norton, go ahead.
No, it's just, well, it's interesting. So a couple years ago in Copenhagen, the Novo Nordisk Foundation had a meeting to hash out this debate, controversy between energy balance thinking and fuel partitioning thinking on obesity. So it was hosted by the Novo Nordisk Foundation, which is a foundation that's related to the company Novo Nordisk, which is making gazillion dollars a year from their GLP-1 obesity drugs. And they brought together leading thinkers on both sides of this divide. So this included like me and Mark Friedman and David Ludwig, who have been arguing for this carbohydrate insulin model. And it included people like Kevin Hall and John Speakman, who have been arguing for this energy balance model. And then there were some influential obesity researchers who thought in the energy balance model, but didn't really think of it as a model. It was just part of their paradigm. They lived in it. And it was a 3-day meeting, 2 or 3 days. It included a escape room exercise, so we could all bond. I thought this was a joke. I've never done an escape room. I worked for myself, right? It's like, what are you guys out of your mind? And we went in and we did the escape room, and luckily there was this brilliant Danish geneticist who had done these often, and so we won, even though I had done it before and thought it was like a joke until we were like, oh.
It's a team building exercise.
It was a team building. The idea was to get us to think like a team so we could
cooperate.
Cooperate, come up with a paper that would discuss both hypotheses and the problems and the experiments that needed to be done and the challenges. The team building exercise was much more fun than putting the paper together, which is we ended up with this paper that's kind of might be evidence that you can't write a paper like that collaboratively. The food was terrific. I mean, the food was delicious and all you could eat. And actually one night they had us go to a restaurant where it's like you're working all day, 8 hours talking about this stuff, and then they have us all go to this restaurant where we have to cook together. That was the thing. It was like a game show, you know, and it helped. And by the end of the meeting, I was like, I liked Kevin Hall and John Speakman enormously. Charming people who I argue with all the time on social media. And I think they even liked me, hard as that is to believe. And we actually said to each other, look, if I insult you on social media, don't take it personally. It doesn't mean I don't like you.
Wow.
Okay.
Like little kids in the playground.
It was. It was like, I respect and think highly of you. I think you're an idiot. And if I say so, it's just on this point. Not about everything.
I don't know if this is just out of the blue, but I don't know if this is how progress is made, but it seems like people make like advances when, if let's say it's like you and me, Gary, and we disagree on something, and it's like we have a beer, and they go, "Come on, Gary, that's bullshit." But you're actually friends with the person and can challenge that person, whereas it really feels like you're at loggerheads when you don't know the person, you haven't spent time with them. Everything seems like it's windshield courage or whatever you want to call it.
I mean, it is interesting. Yeah, on the flip side, though, it's not like I ever had another meaningful conversation with Speakman or Hall about this issue. I think they decided they're best served by leaving it behind, as did everyone else. And but yeah, you actually get to meet, you get to know people. It's far easier to discuss these things. The question is, can you be friends with someone who you disagree with completely?
Well, I think if it's ideas, it's a tough topic for me because Gary Popkin comes to mind because I think he's on, is it the double burden of obesity? So you gave this example of Benjamin Caballero, and they talked about this double burden of fat mothers and stunted, thin, malnourished, subnourished kids. And I remember you gave a talk, you've probably given it a few times. And if you believe if you sort of hold to the paradigm that they're holding to, effectively you have, what was it? So this guy Caballero, he's talking about the slums of Sao Paulo, Brazil. fat mothers bringing their kids in that are, call it subnourished, malnourished, starving. Absolutely. They're starving. And then it says, what may come as a surprise, right? I'm trying to think of it, is that the mothers themselves are overweight. So this poses a challenge to public health authorities because we have to tell the adults in the room to eat less, and we have to tell the kids to eat more. And those are effectively in contrast with one another. And so I've gone through like the literature, not all of it, but I try to find, because it's such a parsimonious solution, is like literally what you're talking about when in the thing where you said, if you believe the paradigm of motherhood, it's difficult for you to think that these mothers are going out and sneaking Snickers bars that their kids could otherwise eat that are malnourished or subnourished. And I think it is an elegant, it actually, if you believe in your paradigm, it is an elegant solution to your problem where you would say, just take the superfluous excess calories from the mothers and give them to the children. You just have to coach the families on how to do this. But when you read the papers, they won't do it. So they talk about socioeconomic status. It's like virtually everything besides the elephant in the room. And so that's where I think it becomes difficult where I don't know if you're talking about like high energy physics or something like that. And you've got an idea and you think it's, bashing these particles.
So it's interesting, two things. These people who study the double burden, they do have a way now to explain it. I forget what it is. Last time I was really interviewing people for a story, which was about 5 years ago, right before COVID, I talked to a couple dual burden people, hoping that they would be open. They would see the conflict, and they have now created a way of thinking about it that makes it not a conflict to them. But the other thing is, so I'm talking to Gary Taubes about the ultra-processed food stuff. I interviewed him yesterday, and Barry's now 81 years old. He's thinking of retiring. Anyway, and I brought up this problem with, do you want to tell people how to eat? Do you get them off ultra-processed food? It's not going to make that much of a difference, but if you get them off carbohydrates, it will. And he said, yeah, I basically don't eat carbohydrates anymore, because if you want to keep your weight under control, you can't eat those foods. And it was like, yes, thank you. So you don't even see, it's how people accept pieces of the paradigm without ever really changing their worldview. It's because the worldview is too destabilizing, that you can still accept parts, but I assume he thinks he just eats less. But I didn't want to push him. I was just so amazed that there I was talking to Barry, and he was telling me he didn't eat carbs anymore. He even said he gets zucchini pasta on occasion. Who knew? Okay, guys.
I want to be mindful of time. We have one question, Gary, before I'm going to let you go.
Okay.
Emily wants to know, what's more important, protein or fat? I'm convinced the only way to get enough protein is to eat whey protein, which I think is bad for you. Thoughts?
Well, Emily, what does Peter Attia think? I think that's what I'm just going to...
We have to wear bracelets. What would Peter Attia do?
I think protein means of first importance.
Yes.
The whole concept of the David bars, right, are maximizing protein content and minimizing calories. So if fat was also important, you wouldn't be minimizing calories. So there's our answer. No, I don't know. I think my feeling is if you're on that spectrum of metabolic unhealth, then anything you would have to take insulin to control is probably best eating in moderation. And since protein, 60% of the amino acids in protein are converted to glucose and require insulin. If you tend to be insulin resistant, then eating high protein diets is probably a mistake. But again,
what about the recommendation that we have to have 1 gram of protein for 1 gram of protein for a pound of ideal body weight? Am I saying that right, Mary Dan?
I don't I don't think like that. I mean, maybe physicians do, but when I sit down to my ground, lamb hamburgers, lamb burgers, and I'm going to probably eat for lunch, depending on whether it's too late to cook them now. I don't think about how much protein I'm getting. It's sort of, I mean, I guess maybe this is important, particularly if you're a vegetarian or a vegan and you have to maximize your protein content because you're not getting in the foods you naturally eat. But otherwise, it's like if you're eating real foods, and you're eating animal products for good or bad, then I just assume you're getting enough protein. That's kind of how I think about it. Maybe I'm just not smart enough to figure out what 1 gram of protein to what is that,
If you're talking like Verda, I think they have a well-formulated ketogenic diet. And I think they use like MetLife tables from 1956, but they have the ideal weights. But it's something like, this is very broad, but like 1 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram of lean body mass, let's say.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Somewhere in that neighborhood. So it's really restrict your carbs. I don't know if it's below 50 grams or 20 grams. Here's where your protein should be. So, muscle protein synthesis, muscle protein breakdown, and then fat to satiety.
But then the question is, what is that based on?
MetLife.
What is it based on?
And how do they know? It's always a question. I mean, like
probably like Vilhelmar Stefansson from like the Inuit.
Yeah, so it's sort of
fatty cuts of meat.
But this is outside of my area of expertise.
Wait, Mary Dan has some comments here.
Well, no, I was just going to say, apart from the MetLife tables, Don Lehman's work also comes in with those numbers. In fact, as you age even a little bit, more, we always said, 0.8 to 1 gram of protein per pound of lean body mass. And he would say even, I think, more, So I think it is important. I think if you're a person who's been feeding yourself for a lot of years, I'm not saying Gary is old, certainly not that. But if you've been feeding yourself for a lot of years, I mean, you kind of know what it takes, what a serving of protein for you looks like. And so you don't have to really think about it. But
so what happens if you're erring on the side of too much?
Yeah, what happens?
What are the negative consequences? So I'm going to sit down and if I wasn't making my lamb burgers, I might grill a steak. I won't tell Carlos Montero this, but I will tell you guys I might grill a steak on my auto grill for lunch.
Outside the house.
Outside the house. Hey, these things get very hot. You do not want to play with these.
Hey, what's wrong with that? Isn't that
well, nothing, but it's like a pound of meat. I don't know. Is that?
I think it's the smell.
Group One, they literally have a picture. At least maybe it's not as paper. But if you look at Group 1 foods, like meat and poultry, they're there.
No, but I mean, I'm not even beginning to calculate what the protein content is. I'm assuming I'm erring on more than I need. But what is the problem with erring on more than, if you say 1 to 2 grams, you're assuming there's some ideal amount and excess protein intake is bad. And I know people used to think, well, that's going to harm the kidney, but there's no meaningful evidence for that. So it's sort of what constitutes excess and what constitutes sufficient. And, if you eat 2 grams or 3 grams per pound of body weight versus 1.5 grams, and we were to do a clinical trial and run it out for 5 years and got perfect adherence, what would we see different in the people eating 3 grams versus 1.5? And if we ran it out for 20 years, would they live longer or shorter? Would they be more or less mobile, longer health span, shorter health span?
I hear you, Gary.
Proteins.
Eat food, mostly meat.
Eat food. There you go.
As much as you
mostly
want.
Meat. Right.
As much as you like.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's so satiating, you're going to stop. I mean, it's really hard to grossly overeat protein for most people.
I take it by, you and your husband and I once ate 6 steaks each at one meal.
But you wouldn't do that. You wouldn't do that the next day and the next. You might do it
No,
once.
after a while, but I could eat 2 pounds of meat. I mean, I could do the Sean Baker thing if I wanted to, and I've always been able to eat a lot of meat. It's not an
But
issue.
there
I
is going to
don't.
be a limit. There's a limit for you somewhere.
Well, but the limit is, again,
You'll
this is
stop.
the thinking on the assumption is, yeah, I mean, I won't get obese doing it. I might gain a little weight, but I don't know. It's an interesting question.
But I think it also feeds
Yeah.
into this narrative of that we need so much extra protein, and then all these products are being like protein washed. So protein is being added to freaking everything, like even Diet Coke, right? Because suddenly we have this narrative that we're
Diet
not
Coke is
getting enough
protein?
Huh?
Diet Coke is protein now?
I think there's some talk about adding like
Well,
protein to these drinks. Yeah.
if I remember correctly, I think Coca-Cola or PepsiCo also bought makes that sort of protein-enriched milk product. I mean, now it's the new code word, and high-fat diets have gone back to being called high-protein diets.
Yep.
You know, I think Peter and his world get a lot of credit for this, whether it's credit or responsibility. You know, I just does it make? I mean, I get that as people get older, they possibly don't consume enough protein, because they're consuming less and less food in general, and if they tend towards mostly plant diets, you're getting that I completely understand, and so they need more. But when they're young, would it make a damn bit of difference if I ate 3 pounds of meat every day versus only 2 pounds of meat and a pound of broccoli? And the answer is yeah, I suspect no. Although I might be better off with the 3 pounds of meat. We don't know.
Marlboro protein. That reminds me. So, flavor country. Gary, did you talk to Montero? I'm curious. Is there like a clinical or practical takeaway, or even so? Is there a threshold of ultra processed foods that one might eat in order to?
I mean, again, the way he thinks about it is you want to deter overconsumption of ultra processed meat. So you want to create systems by which ultra processed foods are expensive, minimally processed foods are not. It's easier for people to prepare food at home and rein in these transnational corporations. It's all the same. To me, it's a sort of a rallying around the term ultra processed foods of all these ideas we've been living with since, fast food nation. And that's why it's like a food becomes ultra processed if you buy it at a fast food restaurant. Like in theory, you can make French fries yourself at home, and it's just oil, potatoes, and salt, I guess. And it's not ultra processed. That would be a Nova Category 3 food, but as soon as you buy it at McDonald's, it's ultra processed just by virtue of the fact that McDonald's sold it to you, whether or not they add anything other than oil, potatoes, and salt to their food.
Make lemonade at home.
Yeah, lemonade at home is.
Or have like a.
But he thinks
now it's ultra processed.
Yeah, when I bring that up with Carlos, his response is we're not thinking about individual foods. You have to think about dietary patterns. And the problem is the pattern. It breaks down when you get to the individual food level. But then when you do that, you're thinking of it incorrectly. That's his kind of.
And then it's not useful.
It's not useful to me, but he thinks it's useful on a sort of global, national level to change this rollback thinking to grandma's time when we're all cooking.
Does he want to call it the Carlos Montero diet?
No, I don't think he's that kind. He's not the.
He's got a good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway.
I know we've got to end, Gary. I know you have to have lunch, and it's 3:30 our time on the West Coast. We can definitely continue this conversation. Anybody want to say anything before we end? And maybe we can carry on another time.
I'm always happy to ramble
So this
on
has been
trust
wonderful.
issues.
Follow Gary's Substack. It's excellent.
Listen,
Yeah.
you guys have to follow Gary's Substack. I am going to post the link in the chat because this is truly the best Substack out there. Also, alongside Michael Eads' Substack and Mary Dan's Substack. But go do Gary's first.
And Mary Dan, we are going to talk about, oh Christ, I can't think of the name now. This is what happens when I haven't eaten.
You're hungry.
The TV show.
We're not going to say it out loud, are we?
Outlander. We are going to say it out loud.
Do it.
Outlander. I mean, it's
Outlander. Yeah. I do a Substack on the medical aspects of Outlander, explaining them from a doctor's point of view.
Yeah.
No. So mine's
It's
a very different Substack. Mike's is real. His arrow on Beehive now. You can also get to it from Substack, but his is real stuff for the most part, and mine's real. It's just real different.
It's just a different way of looking at it and actually allowing normal people like me to be interested in it because there are some really concrete examples of what's going on.
Yeah, there you go.
So thank you. All right, everyone, we are going to stay on with Mia, but you guys can hop, and thank you for being here. I love this conversation. This is the best.
Thank you, Karen.
Bye-bye.
Pleasure, guys.
Thanks, Gary.
Wonderful to see you all.
Bye.
Bye-bye. I go now? I go bye-bye?
You
Where do I
can
stay?
stay if you want.
Yeah, I'm curious. Curious.
Yeah, Mia, where are you?
And mute
There
myself.
we go.
Okay.
Sorry that took a little bit longer than we thought.
That's okay. That was great. Let's see. Okay. So the paper or papers that we're going to talk about are all by Eric Pullman. So this was an obesity researcher. That's how it kind of ties in with what Gary was talking about today. But he started his career in 1980s out of the University of Vermont was when he was doing most of his research. So
My alma mater.
Yep.
This is shocking to me. It's probably my professor.
So over the, I guess, 20 or so years he was there, he published over 200 scientific papers in obesity, metabolism, and a lot of menopause and metabolism research. So as he was publishing all of those papers, there were some things that started to become suspicious. In his Excel spreadsheets where he was keeping the data, it looked like there was random data points that kept being deleted and then later corrected. And there was no explanation basically for any of these changes. So it was a little confusing for the people that were working in his lab. And it was this young, I think there were a post-grad or something like that, or an intern in his lab, but Walter Danino was who it was that ended up being the whistleblower who noticed that there were all these little data changes, and he raised a complaint with the university and started an internal investigation. And so after the Office of Research Integrity did their investigation, they found that there was deliberate data fabrication in multiple of the studies. At least 10 of his papers of the 200 that he published got flagged and were retracted or corrected, including these 3 journals. So we have EJCI, Obesity, and Annals of Internal Medicine were all affected. And then in 2005, he pled guilty to falsifying the data and defrauding federal agencies. There was actually, I think it was 17 grants that he applied for with all of this fraudulent data in his studies, and he got over $1 million, over $1 million in funding for research, which he used grants with fraudulent data to get. So in 2006, he was sentenced to a year and 1 day in prison And he's the first American scientist to serve jail time for research fraud. So now that's, I guess, what he's known for. And he's banned from receiving federal research and funding, and he was required to write a retraction letter to all of the affected journals. And so, I mean, there's a lot of consequences to this outside of just the sentencing. It was really unfortunate that a lot of his research that he was known for was menopause and metabolism. So that was kind of a dark stain on that. And now, it's harder for people to take those topics seriously and get funding. But so that's the story of Eric Pullman. Trying to go quicker today since we went so long, but
a little bit over.
How many questions?
Bob, go for it.
I don't think that this guy's alone.
For sure.
Altering data to fit his hypothesis. Not even I would say not misconduct, just malpractice, bad science. That one's very interesting. It reminds me of the Big Short or something, where there's one guy who went to jail for all the mortgage-backed securities and credit default swaps and yada yada. How does this guy go to jail for a year and everyone else, I think, stays out of the slammer?
Yeah, a lot of the cases that we pull and talk about, they usually don't end this way. It's usually not, going to jail and being banned from funding. It's usually there's still, a researcher and still publishing papers and no one's talking about it. Like the apple cider vinegar retraction one we did, there wasn't a ton of fallout from that. But this one is one of the few that I've looked at that it was they ended up in jail and getting banned from funding. So I guess that's a good outcome.
I'm curious about the...
Yeah, sorry.
Point. Yeah.
No, you go, Bob.
I'm curious, the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute stuff. I'd love to get an update on that at some point, or maybe even just look into it.
Yeah,
I suspect just time's going to go by. They're policing themselves. There's all this data manipulation, images and everything.
Yeah, and the committee that did all the investigation was just so stacked with people that were intertwined with conflicts of interest. So we should probably
the officer, the chief officer of the Office of Research Integrity, I think is Barrett Rollins.
Yeah,
who is the advisor to the CEO, and they're both named on papers.
Yeah,
and the way that they
history of working together for years and years.
And so the CEO is the one who basically is the emperor, thumbs up, thumbs down, in terms of Office of Research Integrity. Was this misconduct? Was it not? And so she's judging this guy who was, I think, her right-hand man for 30 years or something. We're seeing this. And there's other researchers, and they're very prominent, probably really important in the Institute. It's just remarkable how it's set up. And I think part of it is this, it's called the ORI, it's the Office of Research Integrity. And if you get a grant from the NIH, for example, typically the university or the institution, like Dana-Farber has one, universities may have one, probably have one as well. So they have their own Office of Research Integrity, and then there's one of the NIH, and I think they must be overwhelmed. They can't really police all of the studies that they're effectively funding, so they have the institutions effectively police themselves and say, these people that work for you, you're going to determine whether it's misconduct or not. I just remember it's Lori, the CEO, Glimcher. She recused herself from judging her own papers on whether those were misconduct or not. I thought, okay, there we go.
Yeah,
unbiased.
Crazy. We should do a whole update on all of the Dana-Farber stuff, because Emily has that talk that she went through all of these, the initial findings and investigation, but we haven't really gone through and done an update on any of the BSI channels. So I think that would be really interesting.
Russell did a great job of that. Was it Russell Berger?
Yeah.
Yeah. He's got
When was this guy jailed? What year?
2005.
Wow, so this was long ago. You would think that more people would follow suit based on what happened there.
Yeah, I mean, it is pointed to as one of, it's pointed to kind of as like a success story for the ORI, and like, oh, they found this fraud and they punished them. So it's almost used as an example of them being good and doing their job. But it is more common in what I've looked at lately, at least, to find, not really a lot of follow through in these cases. So, but hopefully we'll see more follow through.
Yeah, well, I don't know if he went to a country club or how that works as far as the prison, but that, I mean, for whatever, like, even if it's just one, that to me sounds like a deterrent to thinking twice about doing it. So,
but this was 20 years ago, and so you would think that unless it has been a deterrent, and we have way less cases now than we would have because of this, but I've never heard of this.
Yeah, so I guess 2006 he went to prison, but he pled guilty in 2005. 2006 was when, or he was sentenced, I guess, to 366 days. So 1 year and 1 day.
He served 1 year and 1 day?
That was his sentence, yeah.
Do we know how long he actually was in?
I don't know. Let me see. Let me see if he got out.
I get stuck on the weirdest facts. I just want to know if this man was like actually served.
Let me see if I can find any info on if he actually served out the full sentence or if he went out early.
And also
maximum security.
I just want to know. I just want to know about his experience.
Pound me in the blank prison. I didn't say that. Okay.
We are live on various platforms. We have 65 people watching live right now. 67. It's jumping.
I mean, it's a year in prison.
A year and a day.
It seems substantial, but I haven't.
It's fascinating.
What did he do? Yeah.
I want to just, with regards to like the conversation we had on ultra processed foods, I know you and Pete discussed a paper in Journal Club the other day. What was your takeaway with that? I was on other meetings, so I didn't listen in.
So we looked at the ultra processed foods. One of the papers was Montero, Carlos Montero.
Okay.
So he was defining what they are.
Okay.
And I think I had a lot of the same issues that Gary has. That you can make these foods that are ultra processed, like donuts. You can make them at home with love and care.
Yeah.
Right?
Uh-huh.
And it's not ultra processed if you're using
love
ingredients that are typically found in your kitchen, which means like if there's shortening and sugar and vegetable oil, salt. If you make it at home, it's okay. If you get it at a restaurant, say a fast food restaurant, you go to a Krispy Kreme or Dunkin' Donuts, that's ultra processed.
Yeah.
And yeah, so there's some issues too. Is like the purpose of the processing is in the definition. So it's very difficult to get a handle on all that stuff. But we didn't really get into it. But Kevin Hall had a study on ultra processed foods from I think 2019. He also has one from 2016. There was an issue with that because his studies are, I guess you would say, they're really, really rigorous and they're really, really short. So
they are. Wasn't it 2 weeks or something? The first study he did on junk food?
Yes, and it's a crossover trial. And if you know anything, like we talk about like p-values and statistics, if you want to call it power your study, if you do a crossover study where, I mean, it's kind of cool. So you serve as your own control. So it's kind of like your clone. You're going to do both diets.
Yeah.
So you serve as your controller or one arm and the other arm. And so it's kind of a clever design. The problem with these studies is, let's say that you're doing, like in this case, I think it was a animal, maybe like an animal base. Now I might be confusing the two studies, but one was like a ketogenic diet compared to a low-fat diet. Another one was like ultra-processed foods compared to maybe minimally processed foods.
But it was like salmon and green beans, which is something that people don't even like. Which
can be a factor, which I think they should be well aware of it because they're the ones that talk about hyperpalatability and all that other stuff. So one of the fundamental issues with those studies is not all of them, because I think they've done something which is called a washout. So if you're going to do, let's say I'm going to randomize you and Mia to one of the two groups. You go
Uh-huh.
into the ketogenic diet. Mia goes into the low fat diet. So that's going to be your first week. You're going to be on a ketogenic diet. Mia's
Yeah.
going to be on a low fat diet.
Yeah.
So like almost quite literally 7 days. And then on day 8, they flip you over to a low fat diet.
Yeah.
So there's something called a carryover effect.
Yeah.
And so there are carryover effects of that first diet that are going to bleed into the second week.
Yes.
And when you read these studies or you read the study design, just I'm talking about like methods and protocols, read a textbook, it'll say this threatens effectively the validity of your study. You need to have a proper washout. So that was one of the issues, I think, with that study. But another one more recently was
Yeah.
the headlines are, let me get this right. The headlines, like if you read CNN, I don't know if New York Times covered it, minimally processed food diet has double the weight loss as ultra processed foods. And this was, I think it was also Kevin Hall's group, and this was a 2025 study. But what caught me was doubles the weight loss. And so I go, that's interesting. So what happened on the ultra processed food diet? They lost weight. They just didn't lose as much weight as the ultra processed food. So I thought, okay, you can compare these two things, and this might also have had the crossover issue. They didn't have an appropriate washout. But you would say, maybe this challenges my hypothesis that ultra processed foods are obesogenic.
Yeah.
Because I just put these people on this diet,
And they
ultra
lost weight.
processed food, and they lost weight.
Yeah.
And so maybe there's some other effect that's happening there. So, but that
And what do
wasn't
you think
really.
that effect is?
I don't think you're simulating. I don't think it's so free living conditions. Some
Yes.
studies they get knocked for that because, in a way, it's not very well controlled. I say, Karin, here are the dietary guidelines from the USDA.
Yeah.
Check out this pyramid. It's awesome. 6 to 11 servings of bread, pasta, cereal, potatoes. Right.
I mean,
Whatever.
Lane Norton.
This is what you eat, and then I say,
Uh-huh.
okay, have a good time. Okay, I'll come back in 6 months, and we'll gather some metrics. We'll get some lipids, or we'll get your weight, etc. And so that's sort of free living conditions. You go out and you live your life. You're supposed to be following this diet. The metabolic ward studies are they're inpatient.
Yeah.
So they're really, you're in a room.
Controlled.
That's where we get to, like, if you're not thinking about the entire thing, you go, it's very rigorous in terms of, we know what we're feeding them. We know what they're eating. But I think famously, or at least famously for Gary, the Nusi gig experiment. No, but one of the studies was Kevin Hall's, and they were trying to keep weight stable in the metabolic ward studies. And so they would put them on I think it was like a low carb diet, a low glycemic diet, and a low fat diet.
Okay.
And they were supposed to adjust the diet accordingly so that if the weight started to budge one way or another, they would add food to the diet, or they would, if they were losing weight, or take it away if they were. It turned out, like, for all the diets, they underestimated or overestimated. Basically, they didn't give enough food, and all of them lost weight.
They lost weight. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that often happens, like, if you're in a metabolic ward, metabolic chamber, those type of conditions. I think sometimes it doesn't exactly mimic free living, although I think they try to, but.
Which is hard because free living brings its own set of challenges where they can go off and eat whatever they want and not, say what it is. Which I think the important point here is to always look at the study design, especially when we are reading these headlines. Like, what happened here? Like, let's look at the design. Was the group really randomized control? Wow, Bobby just went dark there.
Yeah.
So I think like this is such a great point in being so aware of the study design, how it was funded, the time period across which it was done. And that's really what we're teaching here at Broken Science. But I know we've been on forever, so I want to be so mindful of everyone's time. Mia, did we find out?
So I have some unverified, kind of sketchy on whether this is true or not, but there's some, I guess, information that he was possibly released after about 9 months.
Okay.
So it seems like he did serve some time.
Did he live in Vermont?
Yeah.
There's a famous, it's Sims and Danforth. It's a famous study. It's called, well, they use Vermont state prisoners.
Oh,
It'd
yeah.
be
Yeah,
interesting.
So he was in prison and he
Where
decided
they
to
tried
run
to,
an experiment?
they quote unquote, they're trying to see what happens if we overfeed participants. And they thought, well, we can't just force feed people. But they're like, we got prisoners. This is before the ORI, I guess, right? But they're, yeah, famous stuff. I remember them. I don't remember this guy because I graduated in '99. I see that as there probably is
there.
some
Well,
crossover. Yeah, but I
You're
don't know if
gonna have
I don't
some
think he was a
memories
professor.
coming up. You're gonna have some memories coming up tonight. You're gonna be like, oh my god, I know this guy. He was in prison. Amazing.
I just remember Tisber. Tisber was one of my professors. He reminded me of Robert De Niro.
Ooh,
And a lot of
I love that.
so it was nutrition. I started taking nutrition courses. And so most people are trying to get a RD, a registered dietitian.
Yeah.
And to Gary's point, most of the people in the class, I might have been the only guy. So it's mostly women,
Mm-hmm.
mostly very thin, very fit. So if they have an idea of, I think actually Emily texted it, which I think is very apt, which is everybody eats, so everybody has an opinion. So Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours. Have you ever heard of that? Like if you have 10,000
Yeah.
hours of
Yes.
deliberate practice in the field, he's quoting these other researchers. It's sort of like a quote unquote magical number.
Uh-huh.
But everybody, if you think about it, everybody I don't want to say our age.
You
I'm in
and
the
I.
Stone Ages. Everybody has their 10,000 hours, right? So everybody's an expert.
sure.
Everybody's eating food, so they know what works for them, or which they think might work for other people. But that is one of the challenges: is that when you work, at least with personal trainers, oftentimes you find that the hardest ones to educate are the ones that are sort of been lean all their lives and never had a weight problem. Not that I recommend it. I do recommend smoking because there are a lot of parallels to sugar addiction, I think.
Oh yes, we can get into all of this. And also what blows my mind and what I'm very interested in is the role of GLP-1s moving into the addiction space. We don't have to talk about that today, but I do think it will be something really fascinating to look at, especially the mechanisms of action. But maybe we can do that another time. Are you up for that, Bob?
Totally.
Okay, awesome. Okay, next week, no idea what's going on, but we will be back. And Bob and Mia, thank you so much for today. This was definitely my favorite show so far.
Yeah, this was great.
It was fun. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining. You should be here every week.
You should have Gary here every week.
Yeah,
Get Mike on too.
Mike would be great.
Mike.
I mean, we have such a great. I want to get Zoe on.
Great crew.
The whole group
It's great
vibe
too.
feels good.
Yeah.
Okay. Bye, everyone. Thank you for today. Bye.